अम, हम बैठ चुके हैं आकर। मोहसिन आप भी बैठ जाइए और सो वील स्टार्ट इन अ मिनट। आप लोग कुछ साइन वाइन करवा लें, हम भी सेटल हो गए हैं, आप भी हो जाएं, फिर हम शुरू करते हैं। लेट मी इंट्रोड्यूस आवर सेल्व्स। मेरा नाम निम्रा है, निम्रा बुच्चा, और मेरे साथ इस वक्त हैं सबीन जवेरी, और मेरी गोद में है ये किताब हिजाबिस्तान, and we're here to welcome Sabeen's new baby into this world. I don't know if anyone's had a chance to get it yet, read it yet. I have, and I'm very excited to talk about it. Hi, Sabeen.
Hi, Nimra. Thank you for that generous introduction.
Sabeen is hardly generous considering I've had so much fun in the last 3 days reading this book. I must tell you about my experience in Karachi growing up as a young adult. My mother used to read a lot of pulp fiction, Khawateen Digest, Kiran, Doshiza. I don't know if you're familiar with those.
I think by the tone of the book, you can tell I am very familiar, and I love reading Teen Aurtein Teen Kahaniyan.
That's it, Teen Aurtein Teen Kahaniyan. So growing up, when my mum owned all these books and we weren't allowed to read them, in fact, my first Sweet Dreams that I bought was also confiscated. It was called The Problem with Love.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, थोड़ा सा गूंज रहा है? हाँ. Okay, is this better? थोड़ी सी आवाज बेहतर हुई है? Sorry जी, sorry. So anyway, so I wasn't really allowed to read those risalas that I'm so... हटा दे माइक बेशक.
पहले सही था.
सही है, ओके. सॉरी जी, सॉरी. तो वो इजाजत नहीं थी हमें पढ़ने की, तो मैं बाथरूम में पढ़ती थी वो, और जैसे
जो आदत अभी तक नहीं गई.
दरवाजा नहीं गई बिल्कुल. और जब दरवाजे पे कोई खटखटाता था तो हमारा एक छज्जा था बाथरूम की खिड़की के बाहर, तो उस पे मैं उसको फेंक देती थी, और फिर बाद में आगे से निकलकर छज्जे पे चढ़कर फिर वो मैं उठा कर लेकर आती थी. But I don't think that I've known so much pleasure as reading that book, that forbidden book, and then going out and retrieving it and reading it again. I think this book has sort of allowed me to experience some of that pleasure. It's really, really, if you haven't read these stories, they are racy, they are sexy, they are important, they're very important stories. So let me start. I don't know much about writing, only a little bit about reading. So I want to ask Sabeen, first of all, Sabeen, Hijabistan, is it a country?
Okay, first of all, I think you do know a lot about writing, okay? Not just reading. And secondly, what you mentioned about, really enjoying those stories which were in those Urdu digests and by those, Pakistani women writers usually. I hate the term women writers, but, just to specify the gender. I think one of the pleasures was that they were very authentic stories written by women, for women, about women, and somewhere along the line, as we got more and more into English fiction, we lost that authenticity. And one of the things I did try to do was bring that back, bring that, that Eastern essence of, female storytelling about women back. So I'm really glad that you captured it right away. And then coming to your...
Yeah. Please go on, but because there's a question leading from this, but go on.
Yeah. Then coming back to your thing, is Hijabistan a country? No, it's not a country. Basically, I liked the title Hijabistan because I wanted to explore hijab as a state of mind. And hijab nowadays is popularly known as a garment, but it has not always been so. the root of the word hijab comes from the word veil, if you were to literally translate it into Arabic. And that idea appealed to me, that what would it be if this word was translated not just as a physical garment that shelters the body, but a metaphor that shelters desires, that shelters identity, that shelters lust, greed, power. And I got that idea, actually it wasn't original, by reading one of the older Urdu writers, Rashid Jahan, who wrote some beautiful stories in 1930s. She was also pioneering a female doctor of those times. And she wrote these beautiful stories where she really experimented with what hijab meant. What was the idea of the veil? How was it used in the zanana? How it provided sort of agency in the public space. She wrote this wonderful story, Visit to Delhi, where hijab is the reason, the veil is the reason why that woman gets to go out on a train in the first place. She has a terrible time, but that's another story. But you know, that idea of hijab being a state of mind, that's what really invoked these stories, and that's why the title Hijabistan, because it's an all-encompassing state that I'm trying to explore.
But it's also lately, it's become a hotly contested sort of garment. And from the stories of these women, some who wear hijab, some who encounter other women in hijab, for some hijab is freedom, for some it's captivity. How do you see this duplicity? Because you use the word duplicity to talk about how these women live their lives. And these are not, it's not just one woman. I mean, speaking of research, there's a maid, there's a prostitute, there's somebody who works in an office, there's the good wife, there's the coach. I mean, what sort of research goes into this, Sabyn, or are you all of these people?
No, I wish I was. I'm not that talented, especially with housework. Okay.
Yeah, the coach thing had me worried, frankly.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't know what to do with a football. It was research because, as you know, I'm an academic as well. So research is something that we do in order to keep our jobs. We have to publish. It did start with a paper on the use of the whale as a metaphor in Rashid Jahan's story. That's how the research I wrote this little paper and that's how it took off. But as I became more and more interested in the topic, I started collecting more and more stories. I thought, I'm going to write this story about, how people use the hijab. I started collecting stories of women women truck drivers, women taxi drivers. And then, as I got into it, I thought that's not what I'm looking at. That's just hijab as a garment, providing you agency to perhaps cross into the public space, cross into a male-dominated domain. What I wanted to explore was that how does the hijab affect our psychology, right? So that's why there's stories about women who don't necessarily wear the hijab, but the hijab is something that's limiting them inside. It's something that is sort of suppressing their desires, their agency, their power, their confidence. Something that is वो उसको ढांप रहा है. आपके अंदर जो शख्स है उसको ढांप रहा है. That's what I wanted to explore. And so that's the kind of form the research took on. And then, it was a kind of sensitive research that I felt I didn't have the expertise or the time to put in an academic form, in a scholarly book. I thought it would be much more interesting and I would be able to reach a lot more people if I was to fictionalize these stories, if I was to dramatize these stories and put them in a short story form. So this was a conscious decision to take that research and to fictionalize them, dramatize them, and make it more accessible, more creative. And I hoped that it would, find a wider audience that way.
And you had more fun than you would have had writing a
Absolutely.
paper. Yes, absolutely. So one of the things, most noticeable things about these women in these stories is they're free. They're free to think what they want, and in some cases do what they want within the confines of that hijab, whether it's imposed on them It's of their own choice. But there's this great freedom that comes, and the freedom I also find in the way that you've written it. I mean, आपको शर्म नहीं आती?
I told you, don't judge me. Okay. You haven't
There's
heard
no
separating the art from the artist.
Sabyn.
Those are the big C's in my life. One of them is censorship.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyhow, but I just realized I didn't answer your earlier question about duplicity. And that's another trait of being a professor. We sometimes like to, drift
Go back
off,
to
and
things
then
like
the
that,
students are
yes.
like, "But professor, you didn't answer my question. Come back." You talked about duplicity, so I would use the word plurality. I think what I was trying to explore was, yes, duplicity, that, that we have one face in public and we have one face in private spheres. Just like we were talking about, our society is hugely patriarchal in the public space, but it's actually very matriarchal in the private space. Women do have a lot of power within the household structure, but that power doesn't really materialize until the woman becomes desexualized. She's an elder, she's a mother, something like that. So I wanted to turn that duplicity.
So the only way to get power in society is to not be a sexual creature as a woman. Is that what you're saying?
Well, not necessarily, but in the stories what I've tried to explore is that, women who are asserting their sexuality, they're being shamed. Either they're being shamed, or they're being punished, or they are considered dishonorable. So that's a contested space. That's what I'm trying to say. But yeah, so I wanted to take that concept of duplicity and turn it into plurality. That you can be this and you can be that. You can wear a hijab, you can still be sexy. You can be a good Muslim woman, but you can still be powerful. You don't have to necessarily fall into that stereotype of being submissive, sacrificial. So I wanted to bring all these different elements which are known as duplicity and actually present them as plurality. That it's not necessarily a negative trait.
Yes, I think I get that. So tell me a little bit about Sabyn the writer. So I know that one of the oldest stories in this anthology is from 10 years ago.
Yeah, actually more than that.
Yeah,
15 years
and
ago.
I think you've been writing short stories for that long.
Yeah.
And yet your first published work was a novel.
Well, I've been publishing short stories for quite a while. I think my first
But
short
the novel
story,
got noticed very widely. It was very well received.
Well, yeah. I mean, my first.
Do you have any complaints?
Too many. We need a much bigger session for that.
Yes, one of the complaints is that a lot of the girls have only got 30 minutes while the boys have an hour to talk about their books.
Unfortunately.
Yes, please take note.
Okay, Asis, I was not going to be happy with that. Okay, so. Yeah, so the first short story that got published was actually thanks to Maniza Shamsi, who's, I think, here. She's putting an anthology together. And actually that kind of sort of started the whole taking writing seriously. Because Maniza's anthology came out in India, we got invited, we went, and we met this wonderful publisher, Retu Menon, who then kept in touch and kept encouraging. And I suddenly found these really inspiring women around me who were very, very sort of supportive and encouraging of my writing. And then I just get, writing. And then only in London, which is also in here, it got noticed by Sebastian Barker, who was the editor of London magazine at that time. So he encouraged me, then mentored me, and then, so then I began to realize that short story writers are not the rock stars of the literary world.
Yes, what's that about? Why is that? Because also short story writing is made out to be some kind of rocket science where you have to get a short story right, and it has to be, and lately it's a lot of short stories are also very abstract, where there's like a sort of zoomed in on like a moment. But your stories go through very fast, very like a lot of ground is covered, a lot of time is covered, and then there's a satisfactory ending to the proceedings. So it's whatever happened to fun story writing? And
I think also when we think of short story writing, because we read a lot of stuff coming in from the West, we often sort of not forget, but sideline the fact that, at least for me, I grew up reading, Teen Kahane, Teen Aurtein Teen Kahani, and a lot of, Urdu writers. So I feel my writing sense comes from that tradition of, Urdu female writers or Urdu writers who were very, the short story was a very acclaimed form, and it was always something that left you very satisfied. Even if you were there momentarily, you got an arc. You saw some sort of a transformation in the character or in the plot.
Between slicing the onions and burning the salad.
Absolutely.
You can read the story. Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, lately, and when I was living in the West, I was always told that short stories don't sell. If you want to write a novel. So writing the novel was a deliberate attempt to
make a living,
get published,
get rich and famous. Yes, and you did.
This is my first love. I love writing short stories.
Okay, so I want you to read something now.
Okay, why don't you read something?
No, you read something.
Okay.
So I asked Sabyn to read something from The Urge, which is the second story in the anthology.
Yes, so it was meant to be the first, but anyone who has been published knows that editors don't really like listening to what the authors think. So for me, this is the first story. Okay. So The Urge, to give you a little bit of context, is written from the point of view of a young girl who is sort of trying to assert her sexuality, and she's had a very confined sort of upbringing, but it's failed to sort of dampen the spirit within her, but it's leading to something more complicated, which you'll find out as I read the story. The Urge. It all began the day they put the all-encompassing dark garment on me. It was a passage to womanhood, they said. Now that I'm older, I must wear a hijab, and an abaya too. I must be good, a good Muslim woman. I had just turned 13. Here, they held it out to me as if it were a prize, and perhaps it was. I tried on the patterned headscarf and the long black cloak-like garment that covered me like a tent. I felt hidden. You're lucky, Amma told me later that day. Nowadays, girls in Pakistan get away with so much. In our days, it was a baggy shuttlecock burqa thrown over our heads with just a few tiny holes to peer through. And then, before we could even learn to walk without tripping on the hem, we were packed off to the husband's house. I fingered the silky material of the abaya. It was smooth, like the chocolates an uncle had once bought us from Jeddah. Amma seemed to be thinking the same thoughts, for she said, "Hey, you remember that beautiful silk your uncle got us from Saudi?" I nodded, to only the sweets had remained stuck in my memory. I had it made from that material only. Oh. I don't know why, but I felt a sudden pang. The smoothness of the fabric was sensuous. It seemed as if this thing really did have chocolates woven into its texture. I had a sudden urge to taste it. I put it in my mouth. Gee, acting like a baby. Amma snatched it from my mouth. Why wasted such a fine cloth from Saudi on you? Oof. Lamenting, she made her way to the kitchen. I thought back to the TV show where I'd heard some short-haired women who looked like boys at the Saudis for not letting women drive. I wondered if that too was a bad thing. Amma, I began, but she was already at the stove. Amma, I called out. They don't let women drive in Saudi. So, she shouted back, it's because they don't make the women work like those blasted Pakistani men who make us fetch the water, work the fields, do the bazaars, whatnot. And where did you hear it anyway? Have you been to Saudi? Don't let women drive. One less thing for us women, if you ask me. Not that we had a car, I thought, checking the deep pockets of the abaya. I held it up against the sunlight and thought a few metal buttons on the edge would definitely do. I got out Amma's sewing box and began sewing an assortment of different colored buttons along the edge. I worked quickly, secretly, keeping one eye on the doorway should Amma make a sudden reappearance. But I knew it would be a while before she left the stove. She cooked with great concentration, and as a result, Amma's food always tasted the same. Was that a good thing? I found myself wondering for the second time that day. You're not secretly watching those vulgar Indian channels with the volume down, are you? Amma called out from the kitchen. I pricked my finger at the sudden sound of her voice. If your uncle catches you, both you and I will get a good thrashing. No, I cried out, the thought of my holier-than-thou uncle's relentless slaps blinding my thoughts. No, I'm just looking at the hijab. I watched as the blood from my fingers seeped onto the abaya, then disappeared into its inky blackness. I wondered if it would stain, but no. The dark material seemed to absorb everything inside it. Very carefully, I put the hijab on my head the way Amma had taught me, then wrapped myself in the long dark hold of the abaya. Something shifted. I looked up to see a lizard on the wall, staring unblinkingly at me. It's still me, I whispered. She seemed unconvinced, so I ran inside for a quick look. In the small, scratched, rusted mirror, hung high on the bedroom wall, I stared at my reflection. Someone else stared back at me. Not a girl of 13, but a dark, mysterious woman. This was someone else, I thought. This was a woman. At first, I enjoyed the freedom the hijab offered. Inside the tent-like abaya, I could be scratching my crotch or unbutton the annoying bra I was forced to wear. Nobody could tell. It was, in some ways, like traveling in your own private marquee. I felt sheltered. Nobody told me not to fidget or to sit still. Nobody said good girls don't pick their noses or scratch their bums, because nobody could tell what I was up to in there. I often wondered if all women did this. How sorry I felt for the menfolk whose freedom I had envied so much previously. They stood there in the hot sun, so exposed, so raw, so open, doing their business with everyone watching. So many times I had seen men standing on the sidewalk, scratching their crotch in full view of the public, or squatting shamelessly on the sidewalks, their limp penis in their hands as they finished peeing. I used to envy their freedom to do what they liked when they liked. No worries as to who might be watching. Now I pitied them. Poor deprived souls, I thought. But then, like most things that one gets used to, this too got boring. I began to miss my colorful clothes. I missed stealing glances at my reflection in shop mirrors and the thrill of getting compliments. There was no longer any point in trying out new hairstyles or haircuts. Even brushing my hair seemed pointless, for there was no one to see it, no one to compliment or to complain. Nobody to notice me at all. I could go out in rags for all I cared. It hardly mattered unless I was going somewhere I could take my camouflage off and stand out. And that was rare. Even at weddings, unless they were segregated, I had to wear the cumbersome garment. It was a woman's fate, I was told. Make the best of it, I was ordered. Check one.
Any questions for Sabyn?
Can I just say this particular passage may sort of give in to what we think of the hijab as a garment. And I don't know if this was the best one to read from. But there are other stories in here which present a different point of view as well. And one of them, which is my particular favorite, is the maid. Which I think we were discussing earlier as well.
If there are no questions, Sabyn could do. Oh, there is a question. Oh.
I would like to know: are these real life incidents you have noted, or they just fiction? Are they real life stories, or this is a pure fiction? These stories, and are there any positive side of the hijab you have noted also from the stories?
Absolutely. So these stories are based on research, but I have dramatized them, I have fictionalized them. But yes, all the stories I feel are positive because all the characters in the story take charge of their destiny. They're not victims just because they are wearing the hijab. It's some of them wear it by choice, some of them are forced to wear it, but all of them are conscious of it, and they are not letting the hijab dictate them. All the characters in this book are taking charge of their destinies. And one of the things I wanted to explore, which I did in my research also, that you do not necessarily have to see results in order to be empowered. Sometimes just thinking about the fact that you can take control if you wanted to, that you do have a choice, is also enabling. And that's what these stories try to explore. In the urge, when you go on into the story, you realize that how she starts to then use it as something empowering, how she takes control of her destiny within the hijab. So yes, most of the stories I would say are positive.
Hi. So I was wondering if you could let us know which story you think was the hardest to write and why. And aside from the stories being connected thematically, did you try anything very experimental with the short story form that you'd like to talk about? Thanks.
Oh, that's a really great question. Thank you for that. I think the hardest story for me to write was Radha and the Date. Because both those stories talked about women sort of taking charge of their sexuality. And, there's this popular notion that women use their sexuality as currency to sort of step up the ladder in society, which some writers, some Pakistani writers have explored. But I wanted to show a different side to it. I wanted to show a more enabling side, a more positive side to it. So that was very hard, very difficult, in the sense that how do you write about that without it becoming a very stereotypical story? How do you sort of show that positive side, and how it can be very enabling, and these women are not necessarily victims, but they're actually survivors. So yeah, the Date and Radha were quite difficult. As far as experimentation with form is concerned, there is a story in here called The Girl Who Split into Two. And that's about, people, young British Asians going to Syria and Iraq to join the jihad. So that is written in the form of a girl who has her past life with her, constantly talking to her. So there's the old me and the new me. And every time the new me is silent, the old me takes charge, but the old me is not visible to the others. So that was something that I really played around with. I loved that idea of experimenting with craft. So yeah, that was one of my most experimental stories.
Any other questions?
It is definitely worth in reading the book. Definitely I'll read it, and I cannot comment about the book now. मैं सिर्फ एक कॉन्सेप्ट के बारे में बात करना चाहता हूँ कि हिजाब को जैसे हम लोग एक बहुत ही इस्लामी किस्म का एक गारमेंट समझते हैं या एक ट्रेडिशन समझते हैं, तो मुझे एक चीज़ मैं आपकी तवज्जो के लिए अर्ज़ करना चाहता हूँ, वो ये कि अगर आप उससे प्री इस्लामिक टाइम में भी जाइए तो हज़रत मरियम की जितनी तस्वीरें और स्टैचूज़ आपको मिलेंगे उन सब में उनको हिजाब में दिखाया गया है। तो मेरा ख़्याल है कि ये एक बहुत ही ज़नाना किस्म का एक वो था, इस्लामी या मजहबी किस्म का गारमेंट नहीं था। तो ये अगर आप बच्चों को थोड़ा सा समझाएंगे, क्योंकि क्रिश्चियनिटी को मैं ऐसे समझता हूँ कि जैसे वो एक प्राइमरी एजुकेशन है और मुसलमान होना एक मैट्रिकुलेट होने वाली बात है। तो जब आप मैट्रिकुलेट होते हैं तो आप ऑलरेडी प्राइमरी से गुजर चुके होते हैं, तो वी आर ऑल गुड क्रिश्चियंस आल्सो एट द सेम टाइम।
Yes, I think that's very interesting जो आपने बात की है। Obviously ये काफ़ी लोगों को पता है कि जब हिजाब जो मतलब covering the head is not a new concept. Even the Greeks still do it. टर्की में होता है, बल्गेरिया में होता है। This existed way before it became an emblem of Islam or Muslimness. covering your head is different, I feel. But I think in modern times, hijab is something which is specifically associated with Muslim women, right? That's different. कि head covering, जो कि आपको पुरानी तस्वीरों में नजर आता है, of Mother Mary, of Greek women still cover their head, Bosnian women do it, Eastern Europeans do it, but that's, you can't say that that's always. I mean, Saudi men cover their head as well, but that's not hijab. Hijab is something that is very, very specifically has become connected with the idea of a Muslim woman. But what I find disturbing is that a lot of people connect the hijab with piety and with spirituality, which is not true, right? A lot of women, a lot of my students, when I was teaching in another Pakistani university before Habib, a lot of the students would wear the hijab just to use the public transport. It had nothing to do with them being a good Muslim or a good woman or being spiritual or being pious. They would just use it because, they would get less harassed on public transport. Not that they would not get harassed, but less harassed. So I think for me, what matters is how the hijab is used, not what the hijab is. Because what the hijab is, I feel, is a different debate. And like I said in the beginning of the session, for me, the hijab is not even a physical garment. Because if we explore our literature and if we really look around in our society, the idea of veiling is not just bodily. It's also about our desires, our needs, our greeds as well. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, we are done with questions now. So thank you so much for coming here,
Thank
and
you.
good luck
Thank
for
you,
your book, Ms.
everyone.
Sabyn.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Nimra, for doing such a brilliant job.